I'm Frank Lee, and this is an odd adventure. For centuries, I've heard stories of aliens coming to visit our pretty blue marble in their intergalactic saucers of doom. Hollywood, the government, and even Popeye's Chicken have done everything they can to suppress the truth about these visitors. I have investigated UFOs across the world, had numerous sightings, and even gone hand-to-hand with a dangerous race of aliens calling themselves the police. For years, I have attempted to stem the tide of the invasion, but when I began to hear reports of aliens passing into the United States on foot, I knew I had to investigate. In my mountain fortress in Colorado, shortly after returning from England, and while cooking some of Mama's own squirrel breakfast sausages, I heard rumors circulating online about a wave of aliens entering the United States via the Mexican border. According to reports, hundreds of thousands of aliens are currently finding their way into the US and causing problems. I knew I had to find these little green bastards and stop them from gaining a foothold, so I jumped in my new supercar and headed to the border. I knew that the aliens were partial to water, loved beans, and liked to sleep in subterranean caves during the day to keep their lizardy skin from drying out. Since I'm not legally allowed to leave the United States, following several misunderstandings in other countries, where I supposedly broke several international laws, I was forced to stay stateside while I conducted my investigation. After a brisk 45-minute drive, I made it to Presidio, Texas, a supposed hotspot for these alien crossings. This favorite stopover of Pancho Villa has been hosting frontiermen and travelers since 1535, when the first Spanish explorers declared the area La Junta de las Cruces. Now, this city houses just over 4,000 residents and one of the best mom-and-pop restaurants in existence, the Bean Cafe. After beelining directly to the restaurant and eating 32 plates of the world-famous bean nachos, and downing 52 Arnold Palmers, I decided to get to work. As is the custom in Texas, I finished my final plate of bean nachos and flipped the table I was sitting at. Then I grabbed my waiter. Holding him firmly by both shoulders, I gazed deeply into his eyes and asked, "What do you know about the alien invasion?" With wide eyes, the pimple-faced server simply stood there in awe of my commanding presence. After several reiterations of my question and enough tears of teenage angst to flood the Rio Grande, I was stopped dead in my tracks by the old familiar click of a cold peacemaker. I froze, contemplating the foolish mistake this poor soul just made. From behind me, a calm and powerful voice broke the silence and told me to turn around slowly. I released the waiter, tears and snot flowing down his face like water from Madrid Falls, and slowly rotated. My eyes fell upon a tall, skinny man resembling a sheriff from the glory days. His eyes were cold and calculating. His hand held the peacemaker steadily and level with the center of my forehead. He told me that if I caused any more trouble, he would gladly bury me in the desert outside of town before finishing his afternoon coffee. For several minutes, we stood there staring at one another. Sensing that this was a man of honor, I made my play and asked him, "What do you know about the aliens?" The question didn't even faze him. Still steadily holding the peacemaker, he looked at me through squinted eyes and simply stated that I wasn't ready for that conversation. I politely informed him that I, Frank Lee, adventurer and elected guardian of Earth, had fought alien incursions on 8 continents, 207 countries, and was the only person on this planet that could handle the coming storm. After a few minutes of tense silence, the man escorted me from the building and around the back. My initial thought was that I was going to be seeing Father Lee in the afterlife in no time. In the back of the cafe, the man led me to the door of a 45-foot-long RV. I turned and stared at him sternly. I told him that no matter what kind of gun he has, he was never going to make me his love slave.
That was one of the dumbest things anyone had ever said to me. I was half tempted to pistol whip him just for saying it, but I gathered he wasn't firing on all cylinders.
He simply stared at me, contemplating my words.
I looked at him dumbfounded for a few minutes, trying to figure out if he was a drug addict or just one of those crazy internet people. And I told him that if he didn't start showing some brains, that he wouldn't be able to handle what I had to offer him.
He then told me that wasn't the plan and that I needed to keep a cool head for what was coming next. He reholstered his weapon and opened the door to his RV. As we stepped inside, my eyes beheld one of the most beautiful surveillance setups in the history of man. The man known as T.A.L had been tracking the alien menace for decades. He had charts of popular crossing points, lists of witnesses, and even a list of popular cover identities used by the aliens to appear more human. He told me that he's been hunting illegal aliens for many years and turning them over to authorities for processing and removal. I politely informed him that there's no such thing as a legal alien, as the intergalactic treaties were not in place for tourism.
Yeah, that should have been a clear sign that he was crazy, but there was something about him that made him seem valuable to my efforts. And he was.
After several hours of poring over the material T.A.L had in his RV, he asked me if I would assist him with his plans to stop the invasion. I told him to give me 24 hours and I took my leave. Despite the intel he provided, I didn't fully trust him. Since it was just after nightfall, I took the opportunity to scour some of the areas that were mentioned in his hotspot list. I donned the latest in stealth gear and perched myself atop a hill overlooking the river. After hours of waiting and watching, I finally saw movement in the distance. Two tall, skinny figures and a shorter, more portly one were silhouetted by the shine of the moonlight on the water. I knew I didn't have long before they made landfall in the US, so I jumped up and sprinted down the hill after them. They didn't notice me until I was within 30 feet and activated my warning lights and started screaming, "Banagastura na kaina!" which is intergalactic basic for "In the name of the ruling council, I demand you stop." One of the tall aliens ran back across the river, and the other jumped out in front of the smaller one to defend it. I flicked on my light and shone it directly in their faces. Unfortunately, it turned out to be a couple of Mexican nationals taking a late-night swim. After sensing my disappointment, the tall man stepped forward and asked me in Spanish what I was doing. I grabbed him by the shoulders and asked him, "What do you know about the alien invasion?" The short, portly woman let out a small cry of terror at my question, and I heard the cry of a baby from under her coat. I looked sternly into the eyes of the man and repeated my question. He just kept claiming no say, no say. I questioned him why he couldn't say for several minutes, but with no success. I knew this man was too terrified to tell me what he knew, so I released him from my steely grip. I watched as they finished crossing the river, feeling the cold water run around my knees, staring into the night. I turned and headed back to my hillside perch. As I arrived, the tall, skinny silhouette of a man in a 10-gallon hat caught my vision. T.A.L's voice broke the silence. He asked me what I thought I was doing letting those aliens cross into the country. I politely informed him that I, Frank Lee, didn't make that kind of mistake, and the training I received made me acutely aware of all the telltale signs of extraterrestrial presence and possession. I also informed him that the people I just saw were just humans.
That man is dumber than a hog having a heat stroke. Plain and simple.
He looked at me in the dark silence and then just turned around and left. I paid no further mind to his words or his apparent disappointment and laid back down on the ridge. For the rest of the night, I saw no signs of movement or life. At dawn, I decided to pitch my tent and sleep the rest of the day. The following night, I laid in wait for what I could sense would be an eventful evening. Around 3 a.m., I saw the movement of a large crowd across the river, and I knew I had to intervene. I rushed down the hill quietly to get as close as possible without discovery. I reached the edge of the river and waited for my opportunity to pounce. And this is where things got odd. Just as I turned on my warning lights and leapt up to grab hold of one of the river crossers, the entire area was lit brightly from the US banks by massive lights. The aliens had outmaneuvered me. I scrambled back to my perch and into hiding, but I was thwarted when a massive man in combat gear tackled me to the ground. I fought fiercely to escape the grasps of the beastly man, whom I have no doubt is an evil enforcer for the intergalactic warlords. I hit him firmly in the jaw and began running. As I started to make my escape, I felt one of the aliens' energy weapons strike me from behind. My whole body locked up as the electricity from the aliens' weapons passed through me. I felt a sharp blow to the back of my head and everything went dark. I awoke to find myself in a federal holding cell, which confirmed my suspicions. The evil extraterrestrials are in league with the government to suppress and enslave the human population and force us to build them bouncy castles. Steele testified against me, stating that I was dangerous and deranged. I spent the next 14 months in federal lockup for trumped-up charges of assaulting a federal officer, as the government tried to hide their collusion. After my release, I was warned not to share the details of my encounter. But I, Frank Lee, don't give a damn. The world needs to know about these shadowy government schemes, and nothing will stop me from sharing what I learned. And though I may have been thwarted in my efforts this time, nothing will stop my ongoing efforts in the pursuit of the truth and my mission to protect the world from the dangerous alien threat. As to Steele's involvement, I have no doubt that he is a collaborator of the alien government working against my protections. I'm Frank Lee, and this has been an odd adventure. As always, have a wonderful day.